I promised I would make something explaining the difficulties Texas has had on defense and how they can correct them. So they've really had three things that they've had problems with. One is gap responsibilities and contain defensively, and that includes some issues on who's going to cover the quarterback against the zone read. They've had some issues on pass coverage and read and man. We really want to avoid those read and man pass coverages. However, if they want to get pressure on the quarterback, they're going to have to bring 4 or 5 people. And when they bring 5, they're going to have to be in read coverage. They won't have enough personnel to run straight zone. I want them to stay out of man because I feel like they've really struggled in man. They've bid on some double moves and they've given up their leverage, which has caused some issues. So they're going to have to be able to execute read coverage when they're trying to pressure the quarterback. And the third thing is getting pressure on the quarterback, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is Texas drawn up in base. This is called the tight formation. I'm not going to go through the pass coverage responsibilities. That's for another post. But I do want to talk about personnel. I really like Byron Vaughn here. He played very well last week at this position. He did a good job. He made 8 tackles. I want to see him there this week as well. And what that does is that frees up Joseph Asai, who's probably our best pass coverage linebacker. He's also very good rushing the quarterback in a blitz. So I want him at Rover and Jawan Mitchell at the Mike linebacker position. Now, with that, there may be situations where a day away comes in and relieves either one of those positions, or maybe McCullough, if he weren't injured, would come in and play B-backer. So a day away may have to come in at the Rover, allow Asai to go to B-backer to give people rest or to get some coaching on the sideline done. So this formation is good against inside zone and power because you have 4 players inside to take away 3 gaps. You have your force player here to the boundary. Your force player to the field is your nickel. He's off the line of scrimmage. And so against inside zone and power, that doesn't create a lot of problems, especially considering you have a Rover who can come here. But against outside zone, the jet sweep, some different traps, things of that nature, you're really open out here. It's also presents some problems when you have a tight end in the formation, and we'll talk about that. So with a tight end to the boundary, you can adjust and solidify the tight formation and still run it as a pretty solid front. There are several options. You can bring the Rover over to occupy C-gap. In this case, you would put your B-backer in a 9 technique, and he would have force just like that. Another option is you can leave your Rover to the field and have the safety play a C8. That's a C-gap, 8 yards from the line of scrimmage, and he has C-gap responsibility. Or you can move the safety out here and put the B-backer in a 6 technique with C-gap responsibility. Either one of those works. It depends on what you're comfortable with as a defensive coordinator. But you do have to be careful using that safety against the RPO. If he's caught between, do I play force and run coverage, or do I go to C-gap and run coverage, or do I cover this tight end as an RPO? It can cause some problems, so you have to adjust for that. And that's really a topic for another post. So now with a tight end to the field, you can see you're very vulnerable here to power, to counter, to outside zone. You've got a double team here. You've got a pretty good down block, and you can either double this and come off to linebacker. If you feel like you need to block the end here, you can do that. I like to double team, come up to the Mike linebacker, depending on who this end and this B-backer is. Then I can cut off this end, kick out block here. This double team is going to come up to the Rover, and now I've got somebody turning up to get that safety. Let's say if the H-back was in this position, it's just a real simple power play. or you can run that with the quarterback as well. So it's really vulnerable to that outside zone. There's a lot of things the offense can do against this formation. So you have to adjust to it. So one thing you can do to adjust to that is you can put your B backer in a 6 technique to the field. You would have C gap. You've got this B backer still in a 4-eye with B gap responsibility. Force here. Here I have the end in a 5 technique, playing the outside gap, and this rover is stacked on the end. He's actually got B gap, but if B gap is closed, he can still flow to the outside. So he's going to stack this end as the ball is snapped and read and see if the threat is to B gap. If not, he will stack the end, maintain his position to where he can fall into B gap if he needs to, or he can get outside if he needs to as well. You can play this with this end in a 4-eye, just like in tight, and then the rover would have force, and the end would have B gap. Either way is fine. I also want to talk about quarterback responsibilities here. So generally in any of these formations, your rover, your B backer, and your nickel back have quarterback on any option plays. The end, the nose, the other end, and the Mike linebacker are all going to play their run responsibilities. So here I've drawn this adjustment up another way. You still have a B backer and C gap. Nickel is the force, but I've switched, put the end in B gap, and the rover as your force player to the boundary side. Another way you can adjust to the tight end to the field is put this B backer in a 9 technique. The rover has C gap. The end is still in B gap. This end is in B gap. And then you bring your nickel to the boundary side to be your force player to the boundary side. And also he can help in pass coverage to the boundary side if there's a slot receiver. If there's no slot receiver, whoever that is to the boundary side, that's the force player, can come down to the line of scrimmage and play force from the line of scrimmage, whether you decide to bring your rover over or you have your nickel come over. So they'll play force to the boundary side, and the B backer still in a 6 technique, has C gap. This is another look that I like. This is the eagle formation. You have a slanted nose, and this slanted nose is actually going to hit this center and try and put him into the play side A gap, the field side A gap, while occupying the boundary side A gap with his own body, and that relieves anybody of having A gap responsibility. Now the rover still has to check the A gap, but it should be closed and he should be free to flow to the ball. So what you do in the eagle look is you have an end, your boundary end, come over and play a 3 technique and have B gap, and then this end is in a 6 technique, and he is going to once again make a collision with that tight end on the line of scrimmage, just like the B backer would in the previous slides, and have C gap. Now you still have your B backer as a force player, your nickel as a force player, and the Mike linebacker has B gap. So this is a good formation against the run. It accomplishes all the other things the other adjustments have done. Todd Orlando did use this at Houston quite a bit, but it's not very good against the run if you flip this formation to the boundary because it takes too many men out of the play. What I really like here is you've got a lot of size to the field side, which means that the offense is going to have to use big on big to block them, and that creates some difficulties and angles. But to the boundary side, you've taken those players away, and against the run, it's not very good. But you can use this formation to get a good pass rush to the boundary side, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So if you're in the eagle look and they come out with the tight end to the boundary, you just make a simple adjustment. You just go right back to tight, and you play your tight formation however you would play it with the tight end to the boundary. So I have it drawn up here with the B backer in a 9 technique. Once again, there's many different options here. I'm not advocating for coaching all of those options into your game plan. Just pick one, the one that you feel comfortable with, depending on personnel, and execute it. Todd Orlando is going to have to make that decision. So another thing that the defense can do to confuse blocking strategies is line stunts. This is actually a linebacker stunt, but he's playing like an end. So this is a BB stunt because B backer to B gap. So we call it the BB stunt. And in this case, now your Mike linebacker has to play C gap or force. The Mike linebacker will also have quarterback in this situation, while the B backer takes the running back against the zone read. We call this a tag stunt because in my defense, I call this end the tackle when he plays a 3 technique. And it's just tackle A gap. And in this situation, your rover now has B gap. Once again, this can confuse some blocking schemes. It's good against inside zone, good against power because now you've taken away this guard's ability to pull the boundary, and it's going to be difficult for this pulling guard to get around that stunt, especially if they're trying to double team here and he stunts here. He can beat this block fairly easily. This is a Y stunt. It stands for tight end because this is, once again, a tackle. TE, people usually say TE, tight end. They call the tight end a Y, so I call it a Y stunt. But in this situation, you just have your end coming into B gap and your other end, which I call a tackle, coming into A gap. Now your rover has C gap. This really confuses blocking schemes against the outside zone. The tight end's going to try and block here, and this guy's going to disappear inside. It makes it difficult for him to get up to the rover, who's now coming outside and flowing kind of fast to the outside. So that really works well against the outside zone. Once again, it's good against pulling guards. Helps slow them down in either direction. And your rover really doesn't have any inside run responsibility, so he can get outside fast. Any of these line stunts that we just talked about can be used to get pressure on the quarterback as well. You can combine them with a linebacker stunt just by adding the term loop. So if you call a Y loop, you now have a blitz package, which is good against the pass. And this is a Y loop. So now if you look, you have numbers 4 on 3. You've got 3 big men on your guard, center, and tackle. And you have an extra rusher coming from the rover position. In this particular look, I don't have to bring my B backer because I have pressure coming from the field. So if the quarterback rolls into the boundary and this B backer is in pass coverage, he can come down and play contain effectively because there's not too much room here. That's a little bit different than if you rush from the boundary side of the field. You do generally want to bring whoever that is, if it's an end or a B backer, in order to play contain there, although it's not always required. That is something you have to be concerned about. So here I have a very similar Y loop look from the boundary. This is out of tight. It's not really a Y loop because you have the B backer instead of an end. We just call it BB loop, and that's because I don't need to call the tag. The end to this side knows he's got to run a tag stunt if the BB loop is called to his side, because otherwise they're both in the same gap, and that doesn't work very well. And you can see I still have the end blitzing, or not blitzing, but rushing the quarterback. He's got to get outside of this to maintain contain if the quarterback feels the pressure and tries to roll to the field. This is just a tag loop. Once again, tackle A gap. And your rover's going to come right through B gap. Get you some pressure on the quarterback. Your B backer, once again, is maintaining contain. He can drop into coverage, but he's got to be that secondary contain, and in that case, you would have to roll your coverage and abandon the boundary flat. So here I have a nose loop drawn up. Once again, we're still overloading one side. You really could say it's 4-on-4, but this guard is not likely looking to block this rover. He's going to come over to block the nose. The nose is going to disappear. The center's coming to block the nose. And we're looking for this guard to be vulnerable and coming off of his hips right up the middle to the quarterback. This is also good if you think that you might be vulnerable against a run, because this rover blitzing A-gap takes away the vulnerabilities of the run out of this boundary eagle look. This is another example of the Y loop, this time out of boundary eagle. That works well. Once again, you've got to be concerned about contain. I really like these boundary stunts against a right-handed quarterback, and it doesn't matter which hash you're on. If he's a right-handed quarterback and you're on the left hash, you're getting blindside pressure on the quarterback, and that's always a good thing. If you're on the right hash, you're going to flush him to the field side, to his left, which is usually a pretty uncomfortable feeling for a right-handed quarterback because they have to throw across their body if they need to throw the ball. They're not usually as good running to their left. So that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully Texas can use some of these different looks and fix some of the issues they've had defensively, and we can come away with a win on Saturday. Thanks for watching, and hook 'em horns.